Part 4 of Dracula. We continue in Jonathan Harker's journal. When I found that I was a prisoner, a sort of wild feeling came over me. I rushed up and down the stairs, trying every door and peering out of every window I could find. But after a little, the conviction of my helplessness overpowered all other feelings. When I look back after a few hours, I think I must have been mad for the time, for I behaved much as a rat does in a trap. When, however, the conviction had come to me that I was helpless, I sit down as quietly as I have ever done anything in my life. I began to think over what was best to be done. I am thinking still, and yet have come to no definite conclusion. Of one thing only I am certain, that it is no use making my ideas known to the Count. He knows well that I am imprisoned, and he has done it himself. He has doubtless his own motive for it. He would only deceive me if I trusted him fully with the facts. So far as I can see, my only plan will be to keep my knowledge and my fears to myself, and my eyes open. I am, I know, either being deceived, like a baby, by my own fears, or else I am in desperate straits, and if the latter may be so, I need and shall need all my brains to get through. I had hardly come to this conclusion when I heard the great door below shut, knew that the Count had returned. He did not come at once into the library, so I went cautiously to my room and found him making the bed. This was odd, but only confirmed what I had all along thought, that there were no servants in the house. When later I saw him through the chink of the hinges of the door laying the table in the dining room, I was assured of it. For if he does himself all these menial offices, surely it is proof that there is no one else to do them. This gave me fright, for if there was no one else in the castle, it must have been the Count himself who was the driver of the coach that brought me here. This is a terrible thought, for if so, what does it mean that he could control the wolves as he did, by only holding up his hand in silence? How was it that all people at Bistrick and on the coach had some terrible fear for me? What meant that giving of the crucifix, of the garlic, of the wild rose, of the mountain ash? Bless that good woman who hung the crucifix round my neck, for it is a comfort and a strength to me whenever I touch it. It is odd that a thing which I have been taught to regard with disfavor and as idolatrous should in a time of loneliness and trouble be of help. Is it that there is something in the essence of the thing itself, or that it is a medium, a tangible help in conveying memories of sympathy and comfort? Sometime, if it may be, I must examine this matter and try to make up my mind about it. In the meantime, I must find out all I can about Count Dracula, as it may help me to understand. Tonight he may talk of himself. If I turn the conversation that way, I must be very careful, however, not to awaken his suspicions. Midnight. I had a long talk with the Count. I asked him a few questions on Transylvania history, and he warmed up to the subject wonderfully. In his speaking of things and people, and especially of battles, he spoke as if he had been present at them all. This he afterward explained by saying that to a boyar the pride of his house and name in his own pride, that the glory in his glory, and that their fate in his fate. Whenever he spoke of his house, he always said we, and spoke almost in the plural, like a king speaking. I wish I could put down all he had said exactly, for to me it was most fascinating. It seemed to have in it a whole history of the country. He grew excited as he spoke, and walked about the room, pulling his great white mustache and grasping anything on which he laid his hands as though he would crush it by main strength. One thing he said, which I shall put down as nearly as I can, for it tells in its way the story of his race. We Skekels have a right to be proud, for in our veins flows the blood of many brave races. We fought as the lions fight for lordship. Here in the whirlpool of the European races, the Ehrlich tribe bore down from Iceland the fighting spirit which Thor and Woden gave them, which their berserkers displayed to such fell intent on the seaboards of Europe, and of Asia and Africa, to till the peoples thought that they were wolves themselves had come. Here too, when they came, they found the Huns, whose warlike fury had swept the earth like a living flame, till the dying peoples held that in their veins ran the blood of those old witches, who expelled from Scythia had mated with the devils in the desert. Fools, fools! What devil or what witch was ever so great as Attila, whose blood in these veins? He held up his arms. Is it a wonder that we were conjuring race? That we were proud? That when the Magyar, the Lombard, the Avar, the Bulgar, or the Turk poured his thousands on our frontiers, we drove them back? Is it strange that when Arpad and his legions swept through the Hungarian fatherland, he found us here when he reached the frontier? That the Hanaflogs were completed there, and when the Hungarian flood swept eastward, the Kisleys were claimed as kindred by the victorious Magyars, as to us for centuries was the trusted, the guarding of the frontier of Turkey land, and more, that the endless duty of frontier guard, for as the Turks say, water sleeps, an enemy is sleepless. Who more gladly than we throughout the four nations received the bloody sword, or at its warlike call flocked quicker to the standard of the king, when we what when we when was rendered the great shame of my nation, the shame of Casanova, when the flags of the Wallach and the Magyar went down beneath the crescent? Who was it but one of my own race, who was as Voivode crossed the Danube and beat the Turk on his own ground? This was a Dracula indeed. Woe was it his own unworthy brother, when he had fallen, sold his people to the Turk, and brought shame of slavery on them. Was it not the Dracula indeed who inspired that other of his race, who in the latter age again and again brought his forces over the great river into Turkey land? Who, when he was beaten back, came again and again and again, though he had to come alone from the bloody field where his troops were being slaughtered, since he knew he alone could ultimately triumph? They said that he thought only of himself. Bah! What good are peasants without a leader? Where ends the war without a brain and heart to conduct it? Again, when after the battle of Mohex we threw off the Hungarian yoke, we of Dracula blood were amongst the leaders, for our spirit would not brook that we were not free. Ah, young sir, the Selecakes and the Dracula, as the heart's blood, their brains, and their swords, can boast a record that mushrooms growth like the Habsburgs and the Romanovs can never reach. The warlike days are over. Blood is too precious a thing in these days of dishonorable peace, and the glories of the great races are a tale that is told. It was by this time close on morning, and we went to bed. The diary seems horribly like the beginning of Arabian Nights, for everything has to break off at cockcrow, or like the ghost of Hamlet's father. May the 12th. Let me begin with the facts, bare, meager facts, verified by books and figures, of which there can be no doubt. I must not confuse them with experiences which I have to rest on my own observation or my memory of them. Last evening, when the Count came from his room, he began asking me questions of legal matters and on the doings of certain kinds of business. I spent the day wearily over books, and simply to keep my mind occupied, went over some of the matters I had been examining at the Lincoln's Inn. There were certain method in the Count's inquiries, so I shall try to put them down in sequence. The knowledge may somehow or sometime be useful to me. First, he asked if a man in England might have two solicitors or more. I told him they might have a dozen if he wished, but that it would not be wise to have more than one solicitor engaged in one transaction, as one could act at a time, and that it is to change would be certain to militate against his interest. He seemed thoroughly to understand, and went on to ask if there would be of any practical difficulty in having one man to attend, say, to banking, and another to look after shipping, in case local help were needed in a place far from the home of the banking solicitor. I asked him to explain more fully so that I might not by any chance mislead him. So he said, I shall illustrate your friend and mine, Mr. Peter Hawkins, from under the shadow of your beautiful cathedral at Exeter, which is far from London, buys for me through your good self my place at London. Good. Now here let me say frankly, lest you should think it is strange that I have sought the services of one so far off from London, instead of some one resident there, that my motive was that no local interest might be served, save my wish only, and as one of London residents might perhaps have some purpose of himself or friend to serve. I went thus afield to seek my agent, whose labors should be only to my interest. Now suppose I, who have much of affairs, wish to ship goods, say, to Newcastle, or Durham, or Harwich, or Dover, might it not be that it could be with more ease to be done by consigning to one in these ports? I answered that certainly it would be most easy, but that we solicitors have a system of agency, one for the other, so that local work could be done locally on instruction from any solicitor, so that the client, simply placing himself in the hands of one man, could have his wishes carried out by him without further trouble. But, said he, I could be at liberty to direct myself, if it is not so. Of course, I replied, and such is often done by men of business who do not like the whole of the affairs to be known by any other one person. Good, he said, and then went on to ask about the means of making consignment, and the forms to be gone through, and of all sorts of difficulties which might arise, but by forethought could be guarded against. I explained all these things to him to the best of my ability, and he certainly left me under the impression that he would have made a wonderful solicitor, for there was nothing that he did not think of or foresee. For a man who was never in the country, and who did not evidently do much in a way of business, his knowledge was acumen of were wonderful. When he had satisfied himself on these points of which he had spoken, and I had verified all as well as I could by my books available, he suddenly stood up and said, have you written since your first letter to our friend Mr. Peter Hawkins, or to any others? It was with some bitterness in my heart that I answered that I had not, that as yet I had not seen any opportunity of sending letters to anybody. Then write now, my young friend, he said, laying a heavy hand on my shoulder. Write to our friend and to any other, and say if it is will please you that you shall stay with me until a month from now. Do you wish me to stay so long? I asked, for my heart grew cold at the thought. I desire it much, nay, I will take no refusal. When your master employer, what you will engaged, that someone should come on his behalf. It was understood that my needs only were to be consulted. I have not stinted. Is it not so? What could I do but bow acceptance? It was Mr. Hawkins' interest, not mine, and I had to think of him, not myself. And besides, while Count Dracula was speaking, there was that in his eyes and in his bearing which made me remember that I was a prisoner, and that if I wished it I could have no choice. The Count saw his victory in my bow, and his mastery in the trouble on my face, for he began at once to use them by his own smooth, resistant, relentless way. I pray you, my good young friend, that you will not discourse of things other than business in your letters. It will doubtless please your friends to know that you are well and that you look forward to getting home to them. Is it not so?" As he spoke, he handed me 3 sheets of notepaper and 3 envelopes. There were all of the thinnest foreign posts, and looking at them, then at him, and noticing his quiet smile with the sharp canine teeth lying over the red underlip, I understood as well as if he had spoken that I should be careful what I wrote, for he would be able to read it. So I determined to write only formal notes, but to write fully to Mr. Hawkins in secret, and also to Minna. For her I could write in shorthand, which would puzzle the Count if he did see it. When I wrote my 2 letters, I sat quietly reading a book whilst the Count wrote several notes referring, as he wrote them, to some books on his table. Then he took up my 2 and placed them with his own, and put his writing materials, after which, the instant the door had closed behind him, I leaned over and looked at the letters, which were face down on the table. I felt no compunction in doing so, for under the circumstances I felt that I should protect myself in every way I could. One of the letters was directed to Samuel F. Billington, number 7, The Crescent, which by another to Herr Litner Varna. The third was to Counts and Co., London, and the fourth to Herren Klopstock and Bullerith, bankers. Budapest's the second and fourth were unsealed. It was just I was just about to look at them when I saw the door handle move. I sank back to my seat, having just had time to replace the letters as they had been, and to resume my book, before the Count, holding still another letter in his hand, entered the room. He took up the letters on the table, stamped them carefully, and then, turning to me, said, "I trust you will forgive me, but I have much work to do in private this evening. You will, I hope, find all things as you wish." At the door he turned, and after a moment paused, said, "Let me advise you, my dear young friend, nay, let me warn you with all seriousness, that should you leave these rooms, you will not by any chance go to sleep in any other part of the castle. It is old and has many memories, and there are bad dreams for those who sleep unwisely. Be warned, should sleep now or ever overcome you, or be like to do, then haste to your own chamber, or to these rooms, for your rest will be safe. But if you do not be careful in this respect, then," he finished his speech in a gruesome way, for he motioned with his hands as if he were washing them. I quite understood my own doubt was as to whether any dream could be more terrible than the unnatural, horrible net of gloom and mystery which seemed closing around me. Later, I endorsed the last words written, but this time there is no doubt in question. I shall not fear to sleep in any place where he is not. I have placed the crucifix over the head of my bed. I imagine that my rest is thus freer from dreams, and there it shall remain. When I when he left me, I went to my room. After a little while, not hearing any sound, I came out and went up the stone stair to where I could look out toward the south. There was some sense of freedom in the vast expanse, inaccessible though it was to me, as compared with the narrow darkness of the courtyard. Looking out on this, I felt that I was indeed in prison, and I seemed to want a breath of fresh air, though it were of the night. I am beginning to feel this nocturnal existence tell on me. It is destroying my nerve. I start at my own shadow, and I am full of all sorts of horrible imaginings. God knows that there is a ground for terrible fear in this accursed place. I looked out over the beautiful expanse, bathed in soft yellow moonlight, till it was almost as light as day. In the soft light, the distant hills became melted, and the shadows in the valleys and gorges of velvety blackness. The mere beauty seemed to cheer me. There was peace and comfort in every breath I drew. And as I leaned from the window, my eye was caught by something moving a story below me, and somewhat to my left, where I imagined from the order of the rooms that the windows of the Count's own room would look out. The window at which I stood was tall and deep, stone mullioned and through weather worn was still complete, but it was evidently many a day since the case had been there. I drew back behind the stonework and looked carefully out. When I saw the Count's head coming out of the window, I did not see the face, but I knew that the man by the neck and the movement of his back and arms. In any case, I could not mistake the hands which I had had so many opportunities of study. I was first interested and somewhat amused, for it is wonderful how small a matter will interest and amuse a man when he is prisoner. But my feelings changed to repulsion and terror when I saw the whole man slowly emerge from the window and begin to crawl down the castle wall over the dreadful abyss, face down, with his cloak spreading out around him like great wings. At first I could not believe my eyes. I thought it was some trick of the moonlight, some weird effect of shadow. But I kept looking, and it could be no delusion. I saw the fingers and toes grasp the corners of the stones, worn clear of the mortar by the stress of years, and by thus using every projection and inequality move downwards with a considerable speed, just as a lizard moves along a wall. What manner of a man is this? Or what manner of a creature is it in semblance of a man? I feel the dread of this horrible place overpowering me. I am in fear, in awful fear, and there was no escape for me. I am encompassed about what terrors that I dare not think of. May 15th. Once more I have seen the Count go out in his lizard fashion. He moved downward in a sidelong way, some 100 feet down, and a good deal to the left. He vanished in some hole or window. When his head had disappeared, I leaned out to try to see more, but without avail. The distance was too great to allow a proper angle of sight. I knew he had left the castle now, and thought to use the opportunity to explore more than I had dared to as yet. I went back to the room and, taking a lamp, tried all the doors. They were all locked, as I had expected, and the locks were comparatively new. But I went down the stone stair to the hall where I had entered originally. I found I could pull back the bolts easily and unhook the great chains, but the door was locked and the key was gone. The key must be in the Count's room. I must watch should his door be unlocked, so that I may get it and escape. I went on to make a thorough examination of the various stairs and passages, and to try the doors that opened from them. One or two small rooms near the hall were open, but there was nothing to see in them except for old furniture, dusty with age and moth-eaten. At last, however, I found one door at the top of the stairway, which, though it seemed to be locked, gave a little under pressure. I tried it harder and found that it was not really locked, but that the resistance came from the fact that the hinge had fallen off somewhat, and the heavy door rested on the floor. Here was an opportunity which I might not have again, so I exerted myself and with many efforts forced it back so that I could enter. I was now in a wing of the castle further to the right than the rooms I knew, and a story lower down. From the windows I could see that the suite of rooms lying along to the south of the castle, the windows of the end room looking out both west and south. On the latter side, as well as to the former, there was a great precipice. The castle was built on the corner of a great rock, so that on three sides it was quite impregnable, and great windows were placed here where sling or bow or culverin could not reach, and consequently light and comfort impossible to a position which had to be guarded where secured. To the west was a great valley, and then rising far away great jagged mountains, fastening rising peaks on peak, the sheer rocks studded with mountains and ash and thorn, whose roots clung in cracks and crevices and crannies of stone. This was evidently the portion of the castle occupied by the ladies in the bygone days, for the furniture had more of an air of comfort than any I had seen. The windows were curtainless, and the yellow moonlight flooding in through the diamond panes enabled one to see even colors, whilst it softened the wealth of dust which lay over all and disguised in some measure the ravage of time and the moth. My lamp seemed to be little effect in the brilliant moonlight, but I was glad to have it with me, for there was a dread, loneliness, and a place that chilled my heart and made my nerves tremble. Still, it had been better than living alone in the rooms which I had come to hate from the presence of the Count, and after trying a little to school my nerves, I found a soft quietude come over me. Here I am, sitting at a little oak table, where in the old times possibly some fair lady sat to pen, with much thought and many blushes, her ill-spent love letter, and writing in my diary in shorthand all that happened since I closed it last. It is 19th century up to date with a vengeance. And yet, unless my senses deceive me, the old centuries had and have powers of their own, which merely cannot kill.